265 AD. The Roman Empire is fracturing at its edges, barbarian raids to the north, breakaway kingdoms in the east, a new emperor every 2 years on average. The treasury is empty, and somewhere in an imperial mint, a worker is following orders. He is adding less silver to each coin. Not dramatically less, just, a little less. Enough that no single merchant could hold a coin, bite it, and say with certainty, this one is lighter than yesterday's. The change is engineered to be invisible. And it works. In the year 100 AD, a Roman denarius was approximately 90% pure silver. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, that same coin, still called a denarius, still accepted as legal currency, still stamped with an emperor's face, contained roughly 2% silver, 90% to 2. That is not devaluation, that is erasure. And here is the part that should unsettle you. The Roman government did not do this because it was evil or reckless or incompetent. It did this because it had discovered something that every government since has quietly understood. There is a tax you can collect without ever passing a law. We call it inflation, but that word has been so overused, so reduced to bar charts and Fed press releases, that it no longer carries any weight. So let's call it what it actually is, a transfer. When a government spends more than it collects and it borrows the difference, it creates a debt. That debt must eventually be resolved. There are only 3 honest ways to do it: raise taxes, cut spending, or grow the economy fast enough that the debt shrinks relative to GDP. All 3 are politically painful. All 3 require sacrifice that voters can see, feel and punish at the ballot box. But there is a 4th option, and it is not honest. You can inflate the debt away. You issue currency faster than the economy grows. The nominal value of the debt stays the same, but the real value of every unit of currency quietly falls. A government that owes $1 trillion in today's money and inflates that currency by 30% over a decade effectively paid back only $700 billion in real terms. The creditors received the correct number of units, but each unit bought less. Who made up the difference? You did. Anyone who held cash. Anyone whose salary didn't adjust fast enough. Anyone who saved diligently for a decade and watched that savings account preserve its number while losing its power. The coin still says denarius, but it's mostly bronze. In the 1970s, the United States ran inflation averaging above 7% per year for nearly a decade. At that rate, the purchasing power of $1 held in a standard savings account was roughly cut in half over 10 years. Not through a market crash, not through a bank failure, through the slow, unremarkable passage of time while the account statement showed a number that stayed the same, or even grew slightly if the interest rate was generous, but bought meaningfully less with each passing year. A family that saved $50,000 through the 1960s, careful and disciplined, doing everything right, held the equivalent of roughly $25,000 in real purchasing power by 1980. No one stole from them, no law targeted them. And yet, a transfer occurred. The people who were hurt most by 1970s inflation were not the reckless. They were not the borrowers or the speculators. They were the savers, the pensioners, the people on fixed incomes who had been promised a number and received exactly that number and were quietly ruined by it. Meanwhile, anyone who had borrowed heavily to buy real assets in the 1960s, land, property, commodities, watched their nominal debt stay fixed while the value of those assets inflated with everything else. Their debt shrank in real terms. Their assets grew. The system did not punish irresponsibility. It taxed patience. This is the part most financial videos skip because it requires saying something uncomfortable. Inflation is not a policy failure. It is often a policy choice. Raising taxes is visible. It requires legislation. It generates headlines, protests, electoral consequences. Every citizen can see the number on their paycheck change. Cutting spending is worse. Someone loses a benefit, a service, a contract, and they know exactly who to blame. But inflation spreads the cost across the entire population invisibly over years. No single year feels catastrophic. No single transaction feels like theft. By the time the effect is undeniable, the government that made the decision is long gone, replaced by a new one that inherits a lower real debt burden and calls it sound fiscal management. The late Roman emperors understood this intuitively, without economics degrees. So did the Weimar government in Germany, which by late 1923 was printing 100 trillion mark notes, not because it had lost its mind, but because at that point, inflation had become the only mechanism left to discharge war reparations and internal obligations that could not be paid in real terms. The method scales. The intent is the same: pay the debt with a currency worth less than the one that was borrowed. The denarius falls from 90% to 50% to 20% to 2%, and the emperor's face on the coin remains perfectly unchanged. Here is where the historically minded viewer gets uncomfortable. Between 2020 and 2023, the major developed economies, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Eurozone, expanded their money supplies at rates not seen since the post-war era. USM2 money supply grew by roughly 40% in under 3 years. The debt-to-GDP ratios in those same economies had, by that point, reached levels comparable to wartime peaks, levels that, historically, have almost never been resolved through austerity alone. They have been resolved through growth and inflation. In the years that followed, inflation across developed economies reached multi-decade highs. Real interest rates, the rate after inflation, remained negative for an extended period, meaning cash savers were losing purchasing power even while earning interest. The percentage is different. The mechanism is identical. A denarius in 200 AD, a savings account in 1975, a cash deposit in 2022. The numbers on the coin, the statement, the screen all say something reassuring, but the silver content is quietly changing. So what did people do? What have people always done when they understood what was happening? They stopped holding the coin. Not dramatically, not all at once. But quietly, over time, the people who understood the mechanism stopped denominating their wealth in the thing being debased. Roman merchants shifted to grain, to land, to goods. Holders of Weimar marks converted into foreign currencies, real estate, physical commodities, anything with intrinsic value that a printing press could not replicate. In the 1970s, gold went from $35 an ounce to over $800 in a decade. Not because gold had changed, because the dollar had. The defense is not complicated. It is not sophisticated. It is simply this: if the unit of account is being debased, measure your wealth in something else. Real assets, things that take labor, land, or scarcity to produce, things the government cannot print. This is not a modern strategy. It is a 2,000-year-old survival reflex, rediscovered by every generation that lives through the same cycle. The question is not whether you understand the mechanism. After this video, you do. The question is whether you act on it before or after. The silver content reaches 2%. If this pattern is new to you, you are not alone. Most people never encounter this framing in school, in the news, or in a bank's financial advice brochure. There is a reason for that. If it resonated, if something in the back of your mind said, "I have felt this, but I didn't have the words for it," then drop a comment below. Just one word. What era hit you hardest? Rome. The 70s? Today? And if you know someone who keeps their savings in cash, who trusts the number on the statement more than what that number can actually buy, share this with them, quietly. The way the tax itself is applied. The next video goes deeper into one of those defenses, not the obvious one, the one most people overlook until it's too late. If you want to be there for that, You know what to do.